Hey there, you have found another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. This episode and all of them are sponsored by Calavista Software, software development without drama. Since 2001, Calavista Software has been trusted by startups and Fortune 100 companies alike for their custom software needs. And we appreciate Calavista Software for being a community champion of the Austin Technology Council and for sponsoring this show. So one of the things we do on this show is we usually interview Austin entrepreneurs who are shaking things up and making things happen right here in town. However, every now and then there's a topic where I think, hey, I met this person, they're doing something really cool, really important. And these are things we need to be talking about in Austin because the truth of the matter is, as great as we are, the whole world does not revolve around Central Texas. What? Did I just say that out loud? But it is true. And I've recently come to know a gentleman by the name of Thom Alexander, and we were talking about sort of the future of workforce. And that's what he specializes in. So I invited him to be a guest right here on Austin Tech Connect. Hey, Thom, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
No, I'm glad to have you here. Thom is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Holistic, and they work directly with companies who have to, want to work on making sure they're taking better care of their employees. What do your people say? What do they say they love about working there? Or what do they say they don't love about working there? That's what Thom's company is all about. And he has a really eclectic background. He's actually worked for an organization that's very similar to the Austin Technology Council. He worked for an organization in Chicago called 1871. That is what I would sort of call the Chicago Technology Council. It was actually founded by J.D. Pritzker. So it's been around a little while. They've been working on trying to grow the tech industry right there. He also worked in communication in the mayor's office for Rahm Emanuel. Both of those guys might run for president. So that would put me just 2 degrees away from the president if one of those guys won, because I'm friends with Thom. And now you're all connected to him through the podcast. So anyway, Thom, I want to jump right into this idea of the future of work. Tell us a little bit about why you founded Holistic and sort of how it came to be.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's great to be here, as I said. As you mentioned, I was at 1871. I was watching hundreds and hundreds of companies and thousands of people come through that space. And I was noticing a familiar trend, which is essentially that accomplished business people had real difficulty talking seriously about the employee experience of their company, even as the role of the individual employee in the workplace was growing immeasurably. And so, you go to a business leader and you'd say, what's your most important asset of your company? And they all say the same thing, which is people, team, culture, people, team, culture. And guess what? There is a right answer to that question, and that is it. Okay, so we're doing great so far. Then you say, you start to ask them some basic questions about their people experience. Do your people trust you? Gosh, I hope so. Well, what about internal communication? This is a true story. I had a business leader tell me, we did an employee survey 2 years ago and somebody told me they liked it. Not even they gave good feedback, just they liked that we did that 2 years ago. That was their response to my question about internal communication. Then you're like, hey, what was your revenue for your Galveston facility in Q3 of 2023? They're like, that was down 1.1% to 2.3 million. That was because truck 17 had a flat tire on September 9th. Remember, Roger was driving because Hank had that hip thing. And so the details were always different, but the story was the same, Thom, which was that business people gave business answers to business questions. And when you ask them a people question, which they said correctly was the most important part of their business, they gave an answer that my 10-year-olds would be confused by and embarrassed of. And what I determined at that time was it wasn't because they were lying or they were stupid or they were assholes or anything like that. It was because they didn't have the language. They didn't actually know how to talk about these matters of employee experience as though they were business questions. So they did what anybody does, which is they parried, right? They just talked. So that's what we set out to solve, that challenge, which was to allow business owners to solve business questions. And here's what I'll say is the articles that sort of spurned this latest round of the Me Too movement came out in October 2017. We launched Holistic in April 2018. just to give you a sense of context about how every single thing that has happened in the last 7 or 8 years has mainlined this discussion about what does the employee experience look like? How important are people? What do we need to do for our employees going forward? Everything that's happened has sort of elevated this discussion. And so I like to joke that we've been doing holistic for the 7 most interesting years of work, which is second place only to the next 7 years, which are going to be more consequential and more interesting even than before.
Yeah, because I think that we're in very challenging times for employers and employees, and there's so many things. We can go so many different directions because I think the workplace is sort of at a crossroads. I mean, I see it from my vantage point. I talk to a lot of CEOs, a lot of people who have startups who are trying to figure out, should I hire local? Should I hire remote? Should I hire international? All this different stuff. What do you think are some of these challenges we're looking for the next 7 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think that there's a pendulum effect in the workplace, as there are in many parts of American life and modern life. And unfortunately, what I think we've seen recently is that instead of the sort of pendulum kind of slowing down and coming to sort of a middle ground, we're actually seeing more pronounced swings one direction to another. And you're seeing that a little bit in the workplace, right? You're going from an environment of extremely in favor of employees to extremely in favor of employers. You're going to an environment of no DEI to speak of to massive amounts of emphasis on DEI to no emphasis on DEI in the course of 5 years, less than 5 years. You went from nothing to, we'll say no to nothing again. And so, and we just keep seeing this type of dynamic. And so right now, I think we're in a moment that's a little bit more in favor of the employer. The employer gets to dictate the terms. Jobs aren't as available as they once were, as they have been in the recent past. There's a lot of belt tightening going on. There's a lot of people who are looking for their next opportunity. Ergo, companies are in a position of power. It won't always be that way. There'll be a period of time in the future where the pendulum will swing back toward in favor of the employee and back and forth and over again. All these different circumstances at play are going to affect how folks operate. And what we're trying to help organizations understand is we don't want to be reactive to the moment. We want to have a sustainable, thoughtful plan in the interest of employees. You talk about AI as a huge challenge. Let's talk about it. Let's have a plan for that. We already mentioned DEI. That's part of the conversation as well. Work-life balance has been a huge concept in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years. That's something that we're still figuring out, and we're still very, very much in the early days. So, I consider us to be in like the first inning, the top of the first inning of what is going to be a very long game as it relates to understanding the workplace.
So it's interesting. You talk about DEI, and it's interesting. I have a lot of friends in my role as a professional speaker. I have a lot of friends who are DEI expert. One woman's been speaking about it for over 20 years. She started in the college market before it was even a topic that showed up. Of course, she rode the wave the last 5 years, and now there's just not as much work out there. Where do you think you talk about the pendulum going from side to side? Where do you think the middle is? Where do you think we should be when it comes to this? Because obviously we have to be aware of diversity. We have to be providing opportunities to people of all backgrounds. But where do you think this matters to companies? Where is the sweet spot?
I think the way you put it is pretty apt, Tom. I mean, the sweet spot is DEI as a thoughtful and essential component of a broader, comprehensive employee experience. So I want to see DEI be interwoven into everything that we do. It should be like breathing. In the mayor's office, you mentioned that I was in communications for Mayor Emanuel, and ours was an office with a heavy focus on communications. And, we really worked hard to engage the media and the press as a part of what we were trying to do. As a result, anybody who worked in the mayor's office realized very quickly if they wanted to get anything done, if they wanted to advance their agenda, their work, they had to have a thoughtful plan about the role of communications in facilitating that. So it built this culture where everybody was responsible for their share of communication. So I see a lot of parallels between that and what we're facing with DEI. And while I was very enthusiastic to see this wave of energy around DEI. I mean, after all, I'd quit a very successful life to build a company around DEI. So I was excited to see organizations getting on board, but the way that it happened was problematic. Specifically, the idea that you would kind of have a person or a group and you just pass everything related to DEI to them. And so that sort of allowed a lot of business leaders to kind of absolve themselves of responsibility, which they did, which they should not do. And secondly, now you got this person sitting over here with, no authority, no return on investment goals, a lot of resources going towards them, and they're a sitting duck when times get tight, and you eliminate them, and ergo you can eliminate the entire DEI program. It's isolated. And that's not a good strategy for long-term success. So the organizations that we're working with and the organizations that I think are successful around DEI are integrating it into their organization in a meaningful fashion. That's part A. Part B is we need to have a better understanding of what DEI is and what DEI is not. And unfortunately, DEI got swept up in the culture wars in a pretty meaningful way and has been villainized. And I think if you talk to a lot of people about it, they would say that DEI is the provision of opportunity to people who are otherwise unqualified based off of their demographics. And that's just not that's not what I think it is. That's not what is happening. That's not a real thing. Now, there's a very, very successful communications campaign to create that target, but that is not what I think of when I think about DEI. When I think about DEI in the workplace, I think about diversity of perspective, diversity of experience. I think about teamwork and collaboration. I think about inclusion and people feeling welcome in the workplace. I think about people of all ages and backgrounds and lifestyles coming together for the pursuit of a collective mission. And everybody agrees with that type of stuff. Everybody agrees with that type of stuff. So I think we have a lot more in common about this type of stuff than we realize, if we can focus on that. We're in this moment where everything is you're with me or you're against me. You're pro-choice, you're pro-life, you're pro-immigration, you want a wall, and all these different types of things. And DEI, unfortunately, people are like, you're pro-DEI, you're anti-DEI. I don't think it should be thought of that way. I think everybody on a really material level is pro-DEI because they're interested in all these different types of things. Real quickly, one really positive effect of the last 5 years that I don't think people recognize is that even though a lot of people are very anti-DEI, they went through bias awareness trainings, they went through all these different types of activities, and the fluency around these matters has just grown tremendously. Mm-hmm. And even people who are like arguing against DEI are talking about privilege and talking about all these different things. And I notice it because I'm in this space and I'm like, the language that folks are using demonstrates that they've been through some efforts in this space. Even if they don't like the way that they think it went, there's been a growth that we will benefit from going forward. I used to use this example about travel. Like if you go to anybody, I know that you have family members who are very into travel. If you go to people,
my daughter's an adventure travel blogger, and so I'll just pimp her out because it's my show. Check out on Instagram or on YouTube, Maximizing My PTO. That's what she does every day. She's somewhere in the world.
Yeah. So you go to anybody and you're like, do you like travel? Pretty much everybody's going to say yes. What do you like about it? Do you like that your legs hurt after being on a plane for 6 hours? Do you like that you don't have any money left in your bank account after you go on your trip? Do you like that you don't have the capacity to take any more time off because you used it all off? Although if you go to your daughter's blog,
you'll learn to maximize it. That's right. Yeah.
No. What do you like about it? You like going to new places, meeting new people, experiencing new cultures, pushing yourself outside of your comfort. That is DEI. That's the definition of DEI. So these things that people really like, those are what I think of when I think of DEI. And my hope going forward, to get back to your question, is that we move past this moment of pro or con and move toward this more thoughtful definition of how can we integrate this into the workplace in a fashion that includes everyone.
And I've never thought about travel as an example for that, but it's true because I've been to, five of the continents. I still got 2 more to go, but I've been fortunate. I've been to a lot of interesting places. And when you're exposed to different cultures and different people and different backgrounds, you don't come home the same. You come home with a very different look on things. And I've never seen that correlation before. You just
there
said
is a physical, visceral experience when you're trying to navigate a place that you're unfamiliar with. Mm-hmm. It's exhilarating. The colors, the smells, the sounds. Am I getting on the right train? All these different types of things are part of that experience. And what you essentially are doing is introducing a diversity of experiences into your body and absorbing them in a very, very acute fashion. What we do in the workplace is a lot more boring than that. And it takes a lot longer, but there are some similarities that I think we should think about.
Yeah, no, I love that example. I'll use that in the future as well. So right now we live in a world, I call it an AI-driven world. We live in a world where people are getting really focused on all the technology. And this has been building. I mean, you and I are about the same age. I think I'm a little older than you are. But this has been building since we got out of college. There was a little bit of tech. There's a little bit more tech. There's a little bit more tech. We're in this hockey stick of technology impacting all aspects of our life, our health, everything. It's also directly impacting the workforce. There's been a lot of layoffs in tech because, I see them in my role. People call me and tell me they've been laid off or they're worried about being laid off. There's also a trend happening now where a lot of like junior technologists, coders and others aren't being hired right out of college. They said that there's less, the people graduating with computer science degrees right now have the lowest employment rate since computer science was a degree. So a lot of entry-level jobs are being eaten up by the AI, but that also affects us 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when those entry-level people haven't climbed the ladder to be the mid-managers and all that. How do you see the impact of technology, specifically AI, but beyond, in the workplace?
I mean, I'm obviously super optimistic about it. I think it's complicated. I'll tell you a story. In 2009, 2010, I was working at the University of Chicago, and we had Bill Gates come to speak on campus. And it was a huge deal to have him come. And he kind of did an interview, and then he took some questions. He was amazing. But one thing that really stuck out to me was somebody asked him a question about whatever the technology du jour was at that point in time. I think it was probably like the iPhone, the iPad. That was that moment, right? And they essentially asked him the same question that you just asked me. And he said, I don't know if this is true or not, but I love it. He said when Gutenberg invented the printing press, people were losing their minds because they thought nobody would ever go outside anymore. They'd just sit around and read books. Which, by the way, great anecdote. Very good anecdote for the University of Chicago. Like absolutely slayed at the University of Chicago.
Yep.
So, but I've always thought about that, right? And his general point of view was new technologies come across all the time, and in our lifetime, as you mentioned, we've had the internet, we've had the cell phone as we know it, we've had blockchain and Bitcoin, we've had AI. I mean, each one of those you could make an argument that was the most powerful technological development in the history of people. And I haven't even mentioned the personal computer. So like all five of those, and those have happened in the last 50 years.
Well, it's interesting.
So it's
my father was born in 1914 and he lived to 2013. And I used to say, if you look at everything that happened from 1914, I mean, that was,
people riding horses.
He was born 11 years after the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk. Yeah. And so that was his lifetime, 11 years after the Wright brothers through, space shuttles, space stations, all this different stuff, the internet, etc. And I always used to say, Dad, he lived to be 99. I said, Dad, that's the most amazing 100-year span to live. And he would say, I think your 100 years is going to be more interesting. And
that's kind of the living example of what I just said about the 7 years and the 7 years, the most interesting years of I totally agree. And I often feel very fortunate that I've lived in an analog and a digital world. I remember what it was like to leave the house and, not know how you were going to get where you were going or how to communicate with somebody and problem solve through those types of situations.
Keep a dime in your shoe so you could call mom if you needed to get picked up.
We used to leave notes on our board in college to tell people where we were going to be, and you just hoped that they saw it and showed up. But I also like the world that we live in now, where I can solve a million problems on a daily basis. So it's a long way of saying, I think we figure it out as a society. I understand why people are concerned about AI. But I'm also enthusiastic about the awesomeness of the potential. One of the things we tell our people is instead of worrying about whether or not AI is going to take your job, worry about the 32 to 35 hours a week that you're presently spending on not your highest, best purpose. And it's that much, Tom. It's that much of our time that we're spending not at our highest, best purpose. It's an extraordinary amount of time. So worry about that time and how can I use whatever technology resources are available to maximize my efficiency. Okay, that's part A. And part B is, now that I have that time back, what can I do? What can I do with that time? And what can I do with that time that a computer can't yet do? I can be emotional. I can be creative. I can be empathic. I can be impulsive. All those things are opportunities. And what I see a lot of is people resisting AI because they're afraid that AI is going to eat their lunch in front of them. But what they're missing with that territorialism is the opportunity to make their lunch taste a hell of a lot better right now. And so that's what we've been kind of encouraging folks to do. You know, I don't know what to say about the computer science statistics. I mean, those are sobering. But, you know, I was a journalist in 2000 when I graduated from college. And I remember having a conversation with my dad being like, you know, I asked him for some advice about my career. And he's like, look, I think being a journalist is a very noble profession. I'm a little worried about the longevity of it. And it took longer than he thought, but I think he was, you know, he saw the writing on the wall.
Yep. Yeah. Interesting. So you lived in Chicago for a long time. You built your career in Chicago. Several years ago, about 3 years ago, you moved to North Carolina, which leads me to this next question I had. And that is this modern idea of location and work. Obviously, you know, you picked up and left. People picked up and leave all the time. During the pandemic, I think everybody moved to Austin. After the pandemic, some of them have left. What is this place we're in when it comes to location and jobs?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I never thought I was going to leave Chicago because my network was there and my life was there. And the pandemic really did change the calculus in a material fashion. I mean, first of all, everybody in the country did this experiment of could working remotely be successful at the same time? And the results were yes. Now we're figuring out hybrid work, return to work, all that sort of thing. But I think it's fairly obvious that some element of remote work is successful and here to stay, right? So that's a big development. And the other part of the pandemic, which I think is less obvious, is that I think it was this massive opportunity for people to really understand what their priorities are. My friend, his name is Ashton Ladd, and he told me something when we actually went to the first Cubs game when they allowed people back into the stadium in the late summer of 2021. And he said that COVID was the greatest self-help book that nobody ever read. And, you know, it's sometimes somebody says something and you're like, holy shit, I'm going to remember that until I die. That was one of those moments for me. We say it a little bit differently, which is if you can't figure out what's important to you right now, in this moment, oidia, you never will. So we're in this age where I think people have a real opportunity to be clear about their values and their priorities and the things that they want out of life. And, you know, using the experience of my family, like my wife and I sat down and we kind of thought about what was going to be the best for our kids, what was going to make us the most happy, what was sort of lifestyle did we want to lead. And our calculus led us to North Carolina, and we love it down here, but it was an extraordinary risk. And 3 years in, it's going well. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? You know, knock on wood, I'm hopeful that the trend continues. I think there are opportunities for people to be really creative about the way that they approach work. I think it comes with a lot of responsibility. And there's always trade-offs. And you have to be really thoughtful and intentional about how it's implemented. I think where folks get into trouble is where they kind of try and have the best of both worlds. You know, I want to be able to work from wherever I want, but I don't see any sort of additional obligation for myself as it relates to communication about how I'm going to be successful for the company. Um, I want to be able to live close to my family, but I'm reluctant to travel when it's really important. Or the company is like not being really thoughtful about the impact that travel is having on people. This is an age-old story. And so we're figuring it out as a workforce right now, as an economy, as a group of companies. It's very interesting because it does open up a huge amount of opportunities, but like any advancement, it opens up a lot of challenges as well.
So I'm a real big believer, in sort of the people side of business myself. I'm on my speaking career. My keynote is called Human Interaction, HI, in an AI-driven world. And I took this job with ATC because I was hired to kind of reinvent the ATC community and what that looks like moving forward. One of the things that I found is, compared to 30 years ago when I was young in the business world, compared to now, is it used to be, if a company moved to town and opened an office, first thing they did is they joined the Chamber of Commerce, they joined the Technology Council, their senior people got involved with Rotary or some other type of community service type organizations. And we're not seeing as much of that now. There's a lot more of, we moved to town, but we're helping the economy because we employ 500 people. So how important is community? And you worked for 1871. You understand the idea of building a tight-knit, community where there is a collaboration. My tagline is community, collaboration, and conversations can solve all problems. How important do you think it is for companies and their leaders and their employees to plant their flag in their community, whatever that means?
I think it's pretty important. I think you can do it without it, but I think it's a little bit like watching a black and white television. You'll get the point, but your experience is going to be substandard. Now, you might not realize that because you've never seen a color TV, but it is. And so, there's a lot. That's one thing. The other thing is there's a lot of different ways of thinking about and building community in the modern era. And, I think we got into this vortex a while back of people being like, well, I'm an introvert, or I don't like going to networking events, or I don't see value from joining the chamber, so I'm not going to do, I don't play golf, all that type of stuff. So I'm not going to do that. Fine. Think of the 400 other ways that you can be a part of community. We had an interesting moment. I'm not saying this as a dig on my employees, but on the contrary, as a reflection of how even people who think about people experience all day long, sometimes need a little push in the right direction. Uh-huh. An employee texted me, said, I've never met another teammate in person. They've been working together every day for years. They live 3 miles away from each other, 5 miles away from each other in the same city. And I said, that can't be true. You must have met at this retreat. No, that person was sick. Well, what about this thing? No, I couldn't go, remember, because I had this planned meeting. Like, what about whatever? No. And I'm like, well, okay, here's what I really think is, in the time that it took you to text me,
that's where my mind was going.
Texted that other person and said, hey, let's go get coffee.
Right.
And you could, that the company will pay for it. And not that, that necessarily matters, but like, we're in favor of you spending your time doing it. And I'm like, here's the other thing, when you send me a picture of that, that's going to be the best moment of my day that day.
Right.
And sure enough, like 2-3 weeks later, I get a picture one random morning of these two folks at breakfast. And it was truly one of the best moments, of our company. I was so happy.
But you bring up an interesting point.
That's a version of community as well.
You bring up an interesting point, and that is internal community is just as important as external community.
Yeah, and it can apply to clients too. I mean, The other day we had somebody say, so-and-so is having a baby and can we send them something, or this person had surgery, or they're just going through a tough time and can we, acknowledge it somehow? And is community more complicated and harder to establish than ever before? Sure. Are there also really creative and interesting and impactful ways of understanding what modern community looks like? Absolutely. I mean, the last time I went on a date with somebody that I wasn't in a relationship with was before Facebook. And I always tell my kids. I'm like, when I was in high school and you wanted to go on a date, you called that person's house and talked to their dad.
Yep. I tell that story too.
Like, okay, what? That is not on the dance card for a lot of kids these days. So technology has made this idea of connecting with people very easy. You hitting the friend button on Facebook or sending somebody a LinkedIn request is a pretty low bar to build what will be a lifelong connection.
Right. But you got to take it beyond that, because I always say a like, a link, a share, and a follow isn't a relationship, but it can start with.
Not necessarily, but it opens up the avenue for you in a really material fashion. So when somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, the world is so complicated and I'm so busy and I can't make any connections," and I'm like, "Man, in an hour you could connect with 500 people if you want to." There would be 500 meaningless connections until you really make something of it.
Right.
Since Adam and Eve, that has been the calculus for human interaction, which is people get together and then we see what happens.
Right. Yep.
And the meaningful relationships take time, energy, mutual interaction, trust, all these different types of things. That hasn't changed. The nature of how these relationships come to pass, the tools that we use to facilitate these relationships, that's changed. But what is happening between two people is the same.
I love your example about the fact that, you've been married longer than there's been Facebook. So you hadn't even gone on a date, before there was Facebook. I always throw out the term, because I have a lot of friends who are younger, in their 30s. And when they say something, I'll just be like, you realize I'm older than Google. Yeah. And, they start calculating, what does that mean? And I say, have you ever seen, the commercials where they talk about Gen X, where, we would go out and play until the streetlights came on? And I'm like, that was the thing. My dad had the ability to stick his fingers in his mouth and whistle really loud. I never mastered that, but my dad was an expert at it. And I could go, my range was like a 5-block range in any direction from our house. But if we heard, and all my friends would be like, I think your dad just whistled. And then I'd look at my watch and I knew it was time to go home because there was dinner or whatever. But it was really that way. I mean, it was an analog world. And I want to go back to what you said before about, I enjoy the fact that I lived in an analog world and a digital world. I think there's an interesting perspective that people in our basic age range have for that. But we all live in the world we live in today. So as we wrap this up, what do you think? What do you tell your clients? What do you tell your own employees? What is the modern employer experience?
Before I answer that question, we had an employee who could whistle with 2 fingers. And
fly me to North Carolina and have him teach me.
I never met her in person, but on like one of our first calls, we were like cheering for somebody and she like busted it out. And I was like, you got to teach me how to do it. And she did teach me how to do it. And I'm like decent at it now. But it's pretty cool.
I mean, my dad, my brothers and I still joke. I think one of my brothers, who's a musician, not a magician, he's a musician. I think he can do it, but he kind of can pick up anything that's musical. So I think his fingers in his mouth count. But my dad could do it where you could hear it 5 blocks away. I'm like,
okay, I'm like 50-50 now. Sometimes I can do it, but my goal is that 2 things. Number one, I want to be able to be the one whistling at the end of the national anthem when I go to the football game. And number 2 is I do want to be able to rein my kids in from 100 yards. What does a modern workplace look like? What does a modern employer-employee experience look like? My view is that it's 2 people sitting on the same side of the table looking at the world together. And I think there are many, many people, many employers, and especially many employees who think about the employer-employee experience as the employers on one side of the table, the employees are on the other side of the table. And it is this push-pull relationship that is tending toward a bad outcome. Maybe you don't get to that bad outcome, but because they have different interests, the bad outcome is in the future. There's a lot of people who believe that. I think if your listeners really thought about it, they could think through the people who work at their company and they could divide them into 2 groups. People who feel that way about the workforce, and then people who feel like the employer and the employer are sitting on the same side of the table, looking at the world together, trying to solve problems together. That's the right way. In my opinion, but I think a lot of people would also agree with me. That is the right way.
So I love that example of sitting on the same side of the table, looking at the world. And I think that goes beyond employer-employee. I think it's true.
Yeah. Dude, I had this employee who worked for us for a very short period of time. One of the things you probably know is that, like, as you have success in your career in life, or even don't, just as if you're around, you end up spending a lot of time listening to people who don't know what the hell they're talking about, explaining to you all sorts of things, and you just have to take it, right? So we had this employee who worked for us for a very brief period of time, and he came into my office to have a conversation about kind of the employer-employee relationship at Holistic. And I was listening, and he had some interesting perspectives to say or whatever. And then he said, I think I could be a representative of this side. And I was like, well, what do you mean this side? Like, that's a little problematic for me. And he said, well, I could represent the side of the employees, and you could represent the side of the employer, and we could, like, get together and, like, kind of, negotiate or whatever. And I was like, that's just very much not how I think about it at all. And this is the part that was really righteous. He said, it's just like in any relationship, there are two sides. Like in your marriage,
oh God,
there are two sides. By the way, this person had never been married. I've been married for, at the time, 15 years. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that is even more offensive to me than what you just said about the workplace. And I think, you mentioned that there's correlations to other places. And I think interpersonal relationship, especially in marriage, is a really great example. And the marriages that I am the most proud of, that I've most enjoyed watching, including my own, have that element of two people sitting on the same side of the table, looking at the world together, trying to face challenges. And I think there's a real aphorism there, or a real corollary there between what we see in the workplace. So, I meet a company and I'm talking to them about what they're doing. And that's a pretty straightforward question. Are you creating an environment that's inviting your employees to sit on the same side of the table, transparently looking at your challenges with an optimistic sense that we're going to solve them together? If you're doing that, you're in good shape.
And that's what we're trying to do with the Austin Technology Council, is we're working with the Chamber, Austin Women in Technology, the Austin Forum. I mean, the list is extremely long. SIM is long, where instead of nonprofits competing and kind of clashing, why don't we all sit on the same side of the table along with all these groups, as well as with the entrepreneurs, as well as with the funders and venture capitalists, as well as with the people who work for the law firms, the banks, and the other service providers. If we're all on the same side of the table, I love this analogy. I think we're going to have a better community.
We learned that at 1871.
What?
We used to, at 1871, we used to say your competitors are actually your collaborators 98% of the time. Yep. Like the way that the modern world is we all have a lot of commonalities. We all have a lot of common interests. We should be focused on those. Yep. And that's where all the opportunity is.
So Thom Alexander, this was a great conversation. Thank you for jumping in quickly. I love it when I say, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast, and people go, let's do it this week. There's so many people who are like, I think December would be a great time. And I'm like, December? I don't even know where the hell I'll be in December. Let's do it now. So I appreciate it when people say, let's make it happen. Any final words?
No, I think anybody who's willing to take the time to thoughtfully pursue a workplace that benefits not just the company, but also the people who work there is doing what they need to be doing in this moment. And so, we're here for it. We're at holisticindex.com, and my email is tom@holisticindex.com if anybody wants to reach out. But I just hope that everybody here, kind of wakes up tomorrow or even later today and sees the world with a lot of optimism, because I think there's a lot of good out there, and there's a lot of areas of opportunity that we can explore together.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation. It's been a lot of fun, and thank you to you, but thank you to everybody who tunes in and listens. I say it every time we do a podcast. This podcast is for the community. So make sure, if you've listened for the entire, what is now 39 minutes and 10 seconds, and you've been this invested in the conversation, make sure that you tell the people in your company, you tell your employer, you tell your next door neighbor, you tell everybody that this podcast is worthy, and keep spreading it. We're growing, but we're growing slowly. I'm ready for that hockey stick. So please make sure that more people know about Austin Tech Connect. And we'll be back next week with another interview. In the meantime, Go out there and find your way to make the Austin tech ecosystem just a little bit better.